In this series, lowimpact.org talks with people working to build a mutually owned, democratic, decentralised economy that builds community and doesn't destroy nature. We want to increase collaboration to bring about system change. Find links to the sites mentioned in the videos in the description below. Join the conversation by liking, commenting and subscribing to our channel.
So this is the third in a series of interviews about the potential for commoning the textile industry. We have Nick and Rosie of Fantasy Fibre Mill working to resurrect the flax and linen industry in Scotland as a commons. I've interviewed them before about their work, link in description. And they're building flax processing machinery from scratch from designs in Victorian textbooks. And they're building open sourced equipment so that farmers can process their own crop. And there's also Dill Green of Mutual Credit Services, who build commons models for all sectors of the economy. I've interviewed him as well about Textile Commons, link in description. And today we're joined by Zoe Gilbertson, who's working to develop bioregional fibre production and local clothing design and manufacture. Zoe, I'll put a link to your Substack in the description as well. Plus an interview you did for David Bollier's podcast. Hi, everybody.
Hi.
So the idea of this series of interviews is to bring together practitioners and specialists in fibres, textiles and commons models to see what we can learn from each other and talk about how we might build a textile commons. People can look at the first two interviews for some background. And I just think this would be a good opportunity for you to just talk with each other. I'll throw in a few points as we go along. Just for starters, do we want to talk about what a textile commons might look like, sort of big picture, or about where we might take baby steps in the right direction? Rosie?
Yeah, I think one of the things I've been thinking about recently with my research on flax is access to seeds, so flax seeds for sort of setting up the beginning of the whole process. So I think that's a region where having a common resource would be incredibly useful. The sort of current lay of the land is that you need a very specific license to be allowed to import seeds into the country, which Nick did a lot of work trying to jump through all the hoops for that. But then we found, even having done that, it was very hard to find anywhere to buy uncopyrighted flax seeds from. So yeah, we're excited to be starting a project now this season where we were donated some uncopyrighted heritage seeds, which I'm growing currently, and we're hoping that'll be like a sort of maybe future common resource for people to be able to grow flax, yeah, without all of the complicatedness of the imports and that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Zoe?
Yeah, I'm quite interested in the parallels between fibre and food. So, you know, the whole situation with the seed is exactly the same with grains for growing bread, and there are, you know, networks that are trying to grow grains, alternative grains, share the seed, and I think their seed is a common pool resource, and they are supporting local mills, local bakeries to create bread. So they have a very similar process, but it's shorter, and the machinery exists currently. But the way that these networks, particularly the Southwest Grain Network, is coming together is very much in the ethos of commoning, but they don't articulate themselves as commoners or commoning, but the way they work is. And I think I'm quite interested. There are a lot of people who are commoning, who are working together, and it's bringing that alive. And I think the more we can talk about commoning and the more we can talk about common pool resource and doing this, more people will realize that is possible. And yeah, I think we can find parallels everywhere, even though it's difficult everywhere, but it is also possible. And the work that Dill that you're doing is more on the sort of financial level with totally different kinds of businesses. But all of these things are kind of, there's a lot we can all learn from each other in different ways.
You mentioned the common pool resource, so i.e. what's the thing that's going to be commoned? So that's a big question, I guess. Is it flax? Is it yarn? Is it the finished products? Is it all of the above? What do you think? Nick?
Yeah, let me jump on this one as one of my favorite topics to sort of get stuck into when it comes to talking about the commons. I actually think that's the wrong question to be asking. So, and I guess that's maybe why you've asked it, to set it up, because I know we've discussed this before. But I think it's actually very important to not ask that question when it comes to our view of the commons. I think, at least for me, the commons is about. So I've written this down. The commons is a social system. And so I'm sort of quoting David Bollier here. It's a social system where we manage things. The reason I'm looking up is because I've got this written down on my board as a kind of reminder for this framework that I operate in. Managing things through cooperation, communication, collaboration, and working things out versus private ownership. And I think that's the framework within which we need to think. And I think that we run aground when we try and think of the work that we're doing in terms of common pool resources, just because that just narrows the field of vision too much. And obviously it does apply to something like seeds, but it doesn't really apply to like a field like textiles or fashion.
Rosie?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting take, to think of it as a social system, and I think that's really important. And like, yeah, I think actually the reason I said seeds is I think that's one of the few specific areas where it does apply as like a common pool resource. But yeah, like I can't quite see how it would work to have a common pool resource of yarn. I think more what I'm imagining is it's the knowledge of how to do the processing and the knowledge of how to set up the machinery is something that can be like widely shared in a community. And that's a lot what we've been working on, setting up like a Discord server, for example, where lots of different people who are trying to build their own open source textiles machinery can all share and collaborate and talk to each other. But yeah, it's interesting to consider like what specifically we're commoning. I'd be interested to know if Zoe or they'll have different takes on it.
Yeah, Zoe?
No, I totally have the same take on it. I use the verb commoning and bioregioning, so that it is slightly vaguer, so we're not pinned out and, like Nick said, hamstrung by, well, what is the common pool resource? And I totally agree with you. We're commoning knowledge, but we're also you can have finance and funding as a common pool resource when we get to that point, and we are starting to do that. I think we'll talk about this a bit later, but you can have land as a commons, but I see, and definitely seeds. That's definitely the resource and a thing that really needs working on. And then the open source machinery that Nick and Rosie are working on, and it doesn't mean that these things will necessarily be free, because people may still have to pay for access to that knowledge, or if they want a machine built, the plans might be free, but the actual knowledge on how to do it's not always replicable. People learn from other people, and I'm quite interested in land commons and how that could work, but I don't see it as just being fibre. I see it as being interwoven with other land-based businesses like food and farms, and all farms these days, whether they're owned by a community or by an individual, they have to diversify. They've got multiple income streams, they've got multiple different businesses going on. And it's likely, I think, that any kind of fibre production we do in this way, local fibre production, is likely to be layered and interwoven with all sorts of other businesses and other people, and other potential commons. So yeah, it's developing relationships, I think, is the key thing, is commoning those relationships.
Yeah, Dill?
My current catchphrase, which I've been overusing, but haven't said it in this conversation, I think, is the price of commoning is local politics. And for me, that's the social relations aspect of it, is actually, if you are just all mates, then you don't need to do politics. If you fall out, you fall out. If you carry on being mates, you carry on being mates. When you've got some sort of interdependence, which is related to your material subsistence, you know, it's part of the way you earn your living or the way you be safe in the world. And if you are commoning that part of your life, then if the management of that goes wrong, you have to engage. You can't leave, because you leave your life. And for me, that's sort of really that is the social relations of commoning. Is it's a political small p relationship, because it's not everybody being mates. It's everybody having to collaborate around things which are real for their well-being. And that, I think, that willingness to engage in that level of politics and take that risk of collaboration and mutual material interdependence is what will define what the common pool resource is. Basically, if there's a group of people who are willing to do the political work to common something, that thing is commoned by that action and its persistence. So there's more to say, but someone's got their hand up, so I'll...
Yeah, Nick, do you want to respond to that?
You're on mute, Nick.
You're muted, Nick.
Sorry, yeah, I lowered my hand but forgot to unmute. To carry on in that vein, this what Dill was talking about reminded me of, well, your initial question, Dave, and also I think a discussion that we had a bit over email around what form does the commons take. This is something that I find very sort of interesting. You know, what are the concrete infrastructures, let's say, of commoning, and also mean infrastructures, you know, social infrastructures as well. You know, like what kind of, you know, what committees do you have, what meetings do you have, even like what financial infrastructures do you have? You know, we've talked in the past about vouchers and things like that, and I think, Dill, this is a point that you made, that the sort of the necessary infrastructures are dependent on the point at which you are in the development of the commons, in a way. So it's almost sort of, you want to be cautious maybe about saying this is how things should be, and be more looking at, well, what does it make sense to organize right now, and what would help right now, and what's the kind of moving on stage from that, which yeah.
Just a quick one, I won't say much, but just on that, we have a whole document about a process of organizational evolution to sort of put in place exactly that sort of mentality. Is let's have enough structure to do what we're doing now, hopefully not straitjacketing too much what we want to do in the future, but also not guessing where we'll be in 5 years' time and what we'll need. Understanding, though, that we need to develop the organizational capacity as we do the rest of the machinery.
Rosie, then Zoe.
Yeah, I think it's great thinking about what types of infrastructure we might want to set up for having like shared resources for, especially for like natural fiber textiles. And I've been thinking a lot about wanting to set up a space where I have my workshop, maybe similar to a maker space, but more specifically for textiles. So you know, you get them in a lot of cities, a sort of makerspace or a hack lab where people can share resources of tools and knowledge, and you might pay like a small monthly subscription. Like the one I used to be part of was £10 a month, and that gives you access to the workshop space and the tools, but also I think, yeah, the sort of like the access to lots of people to collaborate with and knowledge on how to sort of make and repair things, which is really important. So yeah, I've been thinking a lot about what might be the next steps for us in terms of both like sharing all of the research that we've been doing, but also a way that we can make it financially sustainable as well. And that kind of infrastructure might be like a interesting place to take it.
Zoe.
Yeah, I really like the slow development of process, but I think having an awareness that you will need to make time and space to do that, but being open to that process evolving. I teach students on sustainable fashion MA at Falmouth, and they, in the module that I run, they have to create an enterprise. I call it enterprise rather than business, for a fashion commons. And so because they're taught online and they have to do, you know, week by week structure, they are given a process and a format for them to be able to sort of plan this commons. And it's basically got to be socially related to textiles. It's got to be development of social relationships, and they have to map it out and plan it out. But they've not got to be driven by profit. I think that being driven by profit making is the key thing. If that's your only value, then you're just a standard business. But if that's not your motivation, it might be a necessary part of it. But if that's not your motivation and you're willing to share whatever it is you earn, or whatever revenue is created within the system, and it's a really, really easy concept for people to understand, and it's a really easy way they can step into thinking about truly sustainable fashion, is if you just take that out, you just remove the profit motivation. Okay, so what are you going to do? Because most of the businesses that in the mainstream world that are, you know, people are constantly trying to shift to sustainable fashion, they're all underpinned by a motivation to make profit. It doesn't matter what they're making or how sustainable they are, they're still on a drive to make profit, and that profit is extractive. So yeah, I think what underpins the commons is just completely different values.
Nick.
Yeah, so I think what's interesting in what you're saying there, Zoe, is it raises this question of how radical is the commons, and I think this is a point that I'm myself still sort of undecided on, where you have this kind of sliding scale where you might say, well, on one end there's, you know, what you've sort of suggested there, which is, well, if you have a business that's, as long as maximizing your profit, you know, or not obscenely maximizing your profit is not your motive, then actually, if we all just ran our businesses that way, we'd be fine, right? That would lead to more redistribution and a fairer world, and that would be it. And that's the kind of sort of, you know, actually the commons is not at all radical. It's just yeah, taking a bit less. On the other end of the spectrum, you could say, no, there are fundamental drives in how businesses operate and how things are structured, that it's not just enough to sort of introduce this value or hope that people will behave a bit better. You need fundamentally different organizations, limits, ways of exchanging value. Otherwise, the system's just going to get overrun again. And those sort of unfairnesses will just come back. So that's one of the things I'm sort of always wondering about, is how radical do we need to be in this space?
Dill, then Zoe.
For me, the deep radicalism of the commons is a parallel question to the one about profit and money. Commoning is much precedes any sort of abstractly tokenized economy. Commoning is how people lived before there was even agriculture. But the deeply radical thing about commoning, which I think can't be left out if it's to be commoning, is a restructuring of property. It's a dissolution of binary property rights. My eyes were sort of opened to this by some people from the Dark Matter Labs outfit who were trying to represent some outcomes of the work they did, which is I think quite well known around the River Don. And what they were trying to do was make a visual network graph of the rights and responsibilities of the various stakeholders around the river, and to whom, among the other stakeholders, they owed those rights and responsibilities. And that just sort of, I already knew, commons was something about getting rid of dumb ownership. It's all my rights, but it's all my responsibility. It's none of your rights, it's none of your responsibility. And any sort of socialization happens through the medium of the state and planning laws and tax laws and things like that. There is nothing, get off my land, and there's that great poem, where do you get it from? I got it from my dad. Where did he get it from? He got it from his dad. Where did he get it from? Well, he fought for it. Well, I'll fight you for it. It's like, that is supposedly a left-wing story, but actually it's just the same old bloody story. I'm going to have the binary property rights because I'm bigger and stronger than you. I do not like that left-wing cartoon of all the little fishes being chased by the shark, and then at the end all the little fishes club together and become a bigger shark and chase the shark away. I think that's like, no, I do not want to become them. I want to see the little fishes grow legs and arms and walk up out of the sea and say no to the shark. We've evolved. But anyway, so property rights is the radical part of commoning. Money is, I think, an entirely parallel track of human civilizational mechanisms that is or is not part of commoning according to the context the commoning chooses or finds itself in.
Can I bring Zoe in? I think I missed you last time, Zoe. I'm sorry.
No, it's all right. I'm not quite sure what I'm responding to. I guess it's I totally agree with that, Dill and Nick as well. I guess it's introducing it to people at a point they can understand. So it's the world that we live in, and it's just, we want to do stuff in practice now. So how do we are operating in an existing world with a lot of restrictions. And so how do you start? You can start with behaviors, you can start with sharing, you can start with this concept of commoning, and then you can try and work together to figure out how we can get access to land, or how land can become in common, and then potentially whatever you produce on it is then shared in common. But that it's a very difficult thing to get to at this point in time. So it's like working out the intermediary processes that have the ethos of commoning, and people learn how to common together to get to that place that you were talking about, Dill, which I just find it really difficult to see. I find it difficult in this point in time how we get there, but I have every confidence that if we start doing this work and we do it together, we will figure it out, and we will find a solution. Every day I meet interesting people who have a different take on things, and it evolves my thinking on how we might start operating textile commons together. And a lot of it does come down to relationship building with people, I think. But yeah, the river is an amazing example of something that's held in common, and it's really easy for people to understand that because everybody drinks water and understands what happens to that river, whereas textiles is a lot harder because it can be seen as a luxury item.
Yeah, Rosie?
Yeah, I think that's really interesting to think about, like, yeah, how radical we could push it, and is it possible to think about setting up systems which are like completely outside of our economy, like as we know it now. And that kind of relates to one of the projects which me and Nick are working on, which is part of my university research on making the NHS in Scotland more sustainable. And part of that research is thinking of ideas for quite far into the future. So the NHS has all these sustainability and net zero goals for say like 15 or 20 or 25 years into the future from now. And so I've been encouraged to think of some quite radical ideas of would it be possible for the NHS, instead of what it currently does, which is it sources all of its textiles from the cheapest place possible, and it's all imported, a lot of it's polyester or polycotton, and obviously that has a lot of like negative effects on the environment, not just from the shipping, but from the like involvement of plastic itself. And so I've been designing a project for, could each hospital be linked to a small local processing mill, which is in turn linked to several local farms, and how much linen would they need to produce to supply, for example, like all the scrubs needed in Scotland? How many acres would that take? How many mills would need to be set up? And I think that could be quite an interesting case study because it's part of what's already like a socialist system. So, we're lucky in Scotland or in the UK that we don't expect healthcare to be a money-making scheme. It's provided because it's like an inherent good for society. And so it's quite interesting to think about textile supply like in that framework, because it wouldn't have to be part of like a profit-making economy. It would be like supplying a public service or a public good. But yeah, then how do you like that? It's a huge project, and I think probably it won't get taken on, but it's a really interesting thought experiment, and it's interesting to crunch the numbers on it and kind of see, would this be possible, and how would we start heading in that direction?
And Nick?
I think what's also interesting about that example is that it really, it's actually quite a good sort of scenario to run through. And well, how would something like that be done in a way which we are happy with from a commons point of view? Because you could see that project kind of being enacted in a kind of typical sort of state-driven way, in which, the state would say, well, whatever, we need 30 billion to make this happen, so we're going to find a public-private partnership, we're going to like spend the money on this, and these are the kind of projects where actually that kind of state money then ends up getting funneled towards essentially big business. I mean, that's Elon Musk is a lot of his income comes from government subsidies. So I think what's really interesting in that example, Rosie, is like you have on this one level this vision, which is absolutely, I think, sort of a vision we would all get behind. But then you have the realization of it. And how do we make sure that that is realized in a way that we are that we back, and not in a way which actually is sort of just playing back into the hands of the economy and the system as we see it.
Zoe?
Yeah, that's a really, really good point, Nick, because it would be, because in that thought experiment, you would need the hospitals to be thinking in a completely different way as well to be able to support a system. I once worked out how much land would be needed to supply every person in the UK with a pair of linen jeans, one pair a year. And I think it was like about 5 or 6% of agricultural land. Oh no, I worked out the linen needs of every person in the UK. So that would include home furnishings, a couple of shirts and a couple of jeans. So it does take up some land, but not nearly that much land. And I would imagine scrubs would be around that same sort of level. But yeah, then you'd have that whole conversation around land use. What do people really want their land in the UK used for? But these are really good conversations to have.
We've talked about that in Stroud. We're looking for the land commons to own all the land for food production, for firewood and timber, and for fibres, and for the water sector, sewage, reed beds, things like that. Even for housing, even for separate sort of housing commons to own the houses, but the land commons owns the land. Dill.
So we've come round to the other track. So there's this sort of the social viability, the social cost of commoning that you pay in order to change the property rights, and you can find legal ways to engineer the current system so that those dissolved property rights are protected by the property rights of the system, if you want. And that's sort of Hastings Commons have worked very hard on making a community land trust as democratically as possible. But the other track is the viability and resilience track. There is no shortage ever of people commoning. People are doing it, as Zoe says, all the time, everywhere. They want to do it. Even businesses want to do it. You know, small businesses, we've discovered over 5 years from, you know, when we did a food project in Plymouth, and now very much, they're not purely profit driven at all. You might imagine, you know, I grew up as a lefty, and you sort of, oh, businesses, that's what it's all about, extraction of profit. They're all about actually people setting up their version of a right livelihood. And it might not be one that looks okay to you, but if you try and offer them something that will save them money, that doesn't fit with their feeling of who they are, they won't take it. They're not profit driven. They're actually, like, even really quite big businesses are lifestyle businesses, unfortunately mainly for the people at the top, not for the workers who don't get a say. So there's always that. Anyway, human motives to common are always discoverable. People set up community organizations always everywhere. The question is, how do we protect the value that those people produce? Because everywhere anyone sets up a commons that turns out to be produce significant value on a reliable basis, someone comes and says, great, we'll have that. And that's just, so that's where the legal and the financial and the governance structural work that we do comes from, not because we think that's the basis of commoning, but because the history of commoning is that it gets stolen. And any rose-tinted spectacles view of, sorry, that, you know, commoning is about people being nice and sensible and working together, and that's enough, are not paying attention to the history. So the previous, sorry, I'm just going to say, the previous Commons event the week before at Kairos was an amazing woman who is a urban planner working in the Scottish government on community ownership initiatives. And she had 6 or 7 minutes, and she told us all of the amazing initiatives that have gone on in Scotland and how much there is of this, that, and the other, and crofters buying land and people buying islands and things like that. And then at the end, she said, these policies broadly had a history of about 30 years. During that 30 years, land ownership in Scotland has become less equal. So you can have government policy over 30 years supporting what is a storied, set of, events, and you can read lots of happy stuff about Scotland, but actually the direction of travel is still wrong. That's why we have to look at the nerdy stuff.
Rosie, with your tinted spectacles.
Yeah, it's interesting thinking about how to protect a commons. And when we were setting up our sort of like online presence for the machinery design that we've been doing, we did quite a lot of looking into different licenses that protect open source hardware, with the idea of like, we want to make it open source, but we also want to protect it. And the one that we ended up choosing was made by CERN, and it's called like a strongly reciprocal open source hardware license. And the way that works is it gives you the rights to read and study and copy and amend the hardware. But the one caveat is that if you make any changes or improvements, or you make a new invention based off our machine, that also has to have the same license. So you can't like look at the machine, think, oh, this would make a lot of money, I'll make a few tweaks and then patent it and then like gatekeep that for myself. So it almost works like a viral thing where like any subsequent machines sort of based on the original invention, they all become part of the like open knowledge resource. And I'm not sure if there's like an equivalent version of that for like other kinds of commoning, where it sort of says we're setting up a commons and any future projects related to this must remain so it can't like be bought out or sort of go like regress. I don't know enough about the like property side of things at all.
Nick?
No, go ahead, Dale.
I'm just going to make a short comment. Is legal forms are great if you have the same amount of money as the person who's broken the law. And honestly, the legal battles that Microsoft fought to try and destroy Linux in the 2000s were, very, very, very expensive. And it was only because they basically started too late. They didn't see the quote threat early enough that there was enough money in the open source world to win those battles. So yeah, David Graeber wrote a book called The Utopia of Rules, and rules are enforced by somebody, and it ain't us.
That reminds me of we did this like startup training sort of course incubator thing where they were talking about patents, and they were like, well, especially in the medical world, you want to think very carefully how much money you even spend on a patent there, because if someone in China copies it, the UK is not going to war with China to protect your patent. So, on that note, there was an interesting interview recently. Well, I don't know if the interview was recent, but with someone who set up the Open Seed Initiative, which is a sort of open source seed movement mainly in America. And what's really interesting is he was explaining the kind of legal framework, or the lack of legal framework, that they've developed around their seeds. Basically, he says they have what's called a pledge, which is when you sort of participate, you make this pledge to conform to certain values. And the interviewer asked him, well, isn't that far too weak? Like a pledge doesn't mean anything. And he was like, well, yes, but actually that's why we've chosen it, because on the one hand, the people we work with, if you were to overload them with a bunch of legalese, that would actually scare them away. That doesn't help, you know, the people you're trying to help. And on the flip side, the kind of the people who are engaging in this kind of seed movement, the reason they're doing it, how can I say this? In this case, there almost isn't anything to steal. If you see it, I mean, that's putting it maybe a bit naively, but the sort of sort of having a very strong legal defense would kind of be a waste of time in this context. But I think it's a really interesting point to kind of look at, like what are you generating, what's the value of it, and how do you protect it without being naive about it? Yeah.
Zoe?
Yeah, that is really interesting, and I think, I think there isn't you can't sue people or go after people who, you have to be creative and come up with a different idea or evolve your idea again. But I was thinking, is there a way that if you keep things local and small and within a place where you have these relationships, you know, we haven't mentioned it here, but there's the Dunbar number, the 150 people that you have relationships with, etc., which pre-agriculture we would have lived in groups probably around that number, maybe a bit smaller groups within groups, because that's a limit of convivial relationships that you can develop. Do you think if you're locally focused and you're focused on the relationships within a particular area, that then you would hope that would stop people stealing or taking over your commons? I'm not quite sure around, I don't know exactly what you were meaning, Dill, when you talked about Scotland. I guess that in parallel the states actually supported commoning, but because of the dominant forces of capitalism, that has just not happened. You've got all those people coming into Scotland just buying up land in their droves, and I mean that is the scariest thing, I think, in our sort of world today is land ownership, is the wealthy buying land, and we need to sort of fight back against that, but not exactly sure how we get access to land unless you take land. I mean, how do we think about that, you know, or do we have to keep within the rules?
So the housing commons model, if it is proven to work, is a model designed exactly to do that. And there's a land commons model the same. And it does something which a lot of people initially bridle against. It provides, again, if the model is proven to work, we can do spreadsheets, but we can't say we've got 100 houses. It actually provides people who put money in with a pension grade return. So if you like, that's extractive. There is no machinery for getting the land. Well, there are two machineries for getting the land. One is violent revolution, which ain't going to happen even if you are a fan of it. And the other one is buying it. You know, that's it. Luckily, because everybody who buys land buys it on debt, they're paying a lot for the quote price of money to buy the land with. People try not to buy land with their own money because land is not very liquid. So they borrow money to buy land with, and therefore it costs them a lot. So we think we can find a way to split that cost that lenders would get between tenants, giving them a slightly better deal, and people who have pensions. We're not looking for investment from big investors, but the total of pensions of ordinary people in Britain is an enormous sum of money, and it's quite hard to know exactly what sum of money it is, but it's in the trillions. And many people sort of my age are, I haven't got a pension because I refused to sign up for one, but many people my age are able to take money out of those pension funds and put them somewhere else if they had a viable alternative. And the reason people have got money in those pension funds is because they look at inflation, they look at the welfare state, they look at the atomization of society, and it's really something that they feel that they need just to give them a chance at a dignified old age, which is not an unreasonable expectation that a human being might have. So they're not evil capitalist bastards. They're just trying to, do what they can in this screwed up economy. So if we could give them a choice, we believe, where they could invest their money locally and not suffer economic pain as a result of it, and also see local benefit as a result of it. Many people are in dismay about the place where they live or where their children are growing up and have zero agency about what to do about that. So if we can stack the model up, even if the returns aren't spectacular, we think that people will subscribe. And that's the way to get land. And once we get land, then all other things get easier, because in the end, we're all paying rent for stuff that the actual cost of land, not the money cost, but the cost of land is zero. You come out the next day and the ground still holds you up. You come out the next day, the ground still holds you up. Come out in a million years, the ground still holds you up. You didn't spend any money on that. So once you've paid for it, the great trick is that people buy houses on mortgages, and when they've paid for them, they sell them to someone else who takes out a mortgage to buy the land. There's always debt around the houses. But actually, if you take it into the commons, it's never on the market again. You give people security of tenure. They don't need to buy. Anyway, long speech.
Can I ask for a bit of clarity from somebody? I don't know. So commons as a sort of social system and value system is vital. But if we build a textile commons, what does the commons organization look like, and what does it own? Rosie.
Yeah, I think it's kind of the same answer that Nick was saying earlier about, like, it might not be a super tangible ownership of like stuff. It's more like the textiles commons is the collaborating and sharing of knowledge. I guess, and I think there's a lot of different ways it could go. So like in terms of the project that we're specifically trying to set up, we want to build like a pilot flax processing mill, which is a vertically integrated system at a farm. So we're growing the flax, processing it into linen yarn, making textiles. And my sort of vision for the future is that by setting this up as an example, then lots of people all over the country or in other countries can copy and like learn from what we're doing. So then the ideal thing would be there'd be lots of local textiles producing hubs all over the place. And I imagine that they're all just run locally by local people. So the textile commons doesn't like group own all of these separate textile hubs, but maybe they group have access to the knowledge and advice on like how to set them up. If that's my sort of conception of it anyway.
Nick and then Zoe.
Yeah. So to sort of continue on that trend, I guess so the way I think of what we do at Fantasy Fibre Mill is infrastructure for the textile commons. I think that's my kind of like tagline. And then I guess sort of like how you actually organize it in terms of, sort of thinking a bit megalomaniacally, is what we are doing, does that grow into the textile commons, or are we an actor in that space? But basically, I think the textile commons means a supply of clothing or a supply of textile products which are locally made, which conform to these values of what we want to see from our textiles. So the people who produce them are not working extractively. They're made from natural fibers which decompose. But I think what's really encouraging about this vision is that if you oppose it to say what you might think of, okay, a kind of a supply of clothing in, say, a communist state, where you'd have a kind of central plan bureau who would decide, you know, this month we're going to make 50 shirts, and it's kind of out of touch with what's going on. Because it's decentralized, you actually still have space for individual expression. You still have space for this idea of fashion and textiles as a kind of means of expressing either your identity or your locality, because it's not centrally planned. It's anarchic in that sense that it's massively decentralized. And you know, there's lots of like tiny nodes, but when they all add up, they create this supply, which is yeah, the supply of textiles and clothing that we need to live. So I think that's what it looks like.
Zoe? Oh, you're muted.
Yeah, sorry. Just on building on what Nick and Rosie have said, in that they're creating infrastructure for this potential textile commons. I quite like to think of it as fibre, because fibre can also feed the fibre you create for textiles from the raw material can also go into building and into insulation. Flaxseed can create food. You know, you've got these interrelated materials. It's almost like a natural material commons. So it's part of a wider commons. And I think what we've got at the minute, we've got sort of the knowledge sharing part. We've got the networks of people. We've got something called, you know, the UK Bast Fibre Network. We've got something called the Bast Fibre Commons, where it's very nascent. It needs further work. Everything needs time and input from people, but where we're trying to share knowledge, like Rosie and Nick were saying, they've got this Discord which is really alive, and there's so much interesting technical R&D and development happening in that space. And then through this sort of field building and these conversations we've been having, I run a CIC called LIFLAD, which is based around livelihood. So how can we create these new non-extractive livelihoods focused on textiles? And then Southwest England Fibre Shared is very much supportive of the Commons. She's Emma Haig is based in Stroud. She runs a Bristol textile quarter, and that is also very interested in the Commons and commoning. And then we have Wessex Community Assets, who are do a lot around, they're a community benefit society, do a lot around retrofit, around developing new materials in their sort of locality of Bridport. And we formed this thing we're calling the Southwest Textile Commons. And at the minute, we're just working out what that means. We have a pot of money, we have some funding from a foundation, which we're sharing across the 4 different organizations with the idea and the aim that we would create some kind of worker co-op potentially at the end of it. That was the initial idea. But as we go along, we're seeing what's going to emerge. But basically, we're trying to share this funding and developing knowledge. So we have part of the Southwest Textile Commons has got some of Rosie and Nick's machinery set up to try and develop a new system there. And we have someone, Simon Cooper at Flaxland, who's also developing machinery with us. We have this project in Totnes, which is Transition Town Totnes, which is called Totnes Grows Flax. And so we're trying to seed the idea of flax growing and processing within the community and developing relationships within the community, which hopefully will then lead to relationships around land and people coming together to say, yeah, let's because there's a lot happening in the Totnes area. So there's all these layers of different forms of commoning and network building and knowledge sharing that we're not quite sure what the outcome will be, but it's very much alive. And so hopefully the outcome is that we are able to produce some form of textiles. But who knows, it might be with the Bridport people, it might be up in Scotland, it might be in Totnes, but they'll all be slightly different, and they'll all have their own lens, and they'll probably all have their own focus and outputs, and hopefully take on the character of those local places.
There's lots of things happening. Dill.
I really like that and my version of, I think, what's been said is that any commons is likely, when you look at it, commons sort of economy, to be a weaving together of different commons. So, land is a commons, but might support many other types of commoning on top of it. And I think the thing I would like to bring to this is something, I think I put it in one of the emails, this idea called characteristic scale. And I think that's got a lot to do with the Dunbar number size groups that you're talking about, Zoe, being the right human scale to have the sort of politics that I'm talking about without it becoming party politics, or, it stays personal and it stays real. And you, exactly as you were saying, who's cheating because they live around the corner, and you can just go around and say, all right, mate, that's not wrong. What are we going to do about it? But at the same time, there's a characteristic scale for, let's say, doing the R&D to develop machinery. And that is not going to be done for one town. That needs to be able to know that there's going to be a certain number of uses of that machinery, giving some feedback, so that development of the technology, maintenance of the technology, awareness that, it turns out that bit doesn't work very well in these northern conditions where the fiber's wetter than it might be. I'm making things up. Yeah. We need to, adapt. All of that stuff has got a different characteristic scale. The ownership of land will have a different characteristic of scale. So, if you, the boring old rainforest metaphor, there are giant trees, there are tiny little termites, but the termites, spread across a huge area. And then there are the mycelia underneath, which link it all together. There's an awful lot of different scales, which at the same time have their wholeness. The fungi are the fungi, the termites are the termites, the trees are the trees, but need to interact to make the rainforest, which is the actual experience of it. And so I think, and this is really hard for us to think about, because our brains are not really complexity. Our subconscious does brilliant complexity analysis, but our consciousness, our thinking mind, is all about reductiveness into simpler metaphors. So we have to work quite hard to be able to flip in and out of different modes to build these things, which, blimey, it's a lot.
Bill, do you think Mutual Create Services might develop tools that could interest a budding textile commons? And if so, what would you need to know?
We sort of have got some sort of primitives that we think are quite generally applicable, but we don't sort of go into places and say, right, we're designing a model for you. It's always a co-design, really. It needs to be. We've had to start by not doing co-design because we've had to find our way into spaces where we think we can offer something which will give us a first little motor that will run, on which we can build other stuff. And that's the project in Liverpool. But generally, the question always for the sort of stuff, the finance stuff particularly we do, is the degree of circularity that is in the community or context which is seeking a model, and whether it's got enough, whether we can find something to bring in that will add too much, or whether it's got too much and it can't survive without better connections to the outside. So, I mean, yeah, we like to talk to people who want to build things. On the other hand, our capacity is pretty much maxed out at the moment until we get through a sort of bottleneck of launching this thing in Liverpool end of this year. So, I mean, the conversations are always wonderful. But yeah, we don't sort of go into spaces that where there are local experts say, we know how to do your stuff.
No, I'll just say there's plenty of scope for co-design. I mean, we all know each other now and got a good idea of what we're all up to. Rosie.
Yeah, I like the sort of idea of thinking about scales, like what's the most appropriate scale. And something which I think about a lot in terms of what we're aiming for is the idea of having like global knowledge exchange, but local produce exchange. So when we're thinking about, designing the machinery, we're collaborating very closely with like Jordan and West Virginia. We've also been working in the past with people in Berlin and in the Netherlands, and taking inspiration from, projects basically anywhere that we're in touch with that grows flax in Canada and the States and lots of different places, as well as around the UK. And that's the kind of scale that it works for, because there's lots of people wanting to make open source textiles mills a thing, and we can all share and benefit from each other. But then in terms of actually producing like physical objects, I think we want it to be super local, and we're really just thinking about, could we set up our textile mill in Scotland just even supplying like the village that we're based in, or the sort of southeast of Scotland, or that kind of much more local scale. And we often describe the equipment that we're trying to build as like farm scale equipment, because a lot of people ask us like, oh, why are you designing machinery, surely this already exists, and it does, but on a scale where you'd be needing to invest in the sort of like multi-million, tens of millions of pounds, and growing thousands of hectares of flax. And so we're trying to build stuff that's for like a small to medium size, like local farm. But yeah, I think the scale question is really key to like planning what we're doing.
So was that you, Nick? No, okay. So
it was the universal sign language sign for I agree.
Oh, right, okay. I was do we need some sort of a secondary institution or a series of, secondary institutions, centers of excellence, development agencies, or something like that to help local commons groups to develop? And would that be commons generally or specifically textile commons?
That might be. Oh no, Rosie, go.
Oh, sorry. I think we already have a lot of groups. So like sort of Zoe was describing earlier, there's sort of Fibre Shed is an overall international group, and then it has all its local chapters, and then there's all the different projects that we're all part of, the Bast Fibre. I must be in like 10 different group chats about flax, which a lot of which overlap with each other. And so I think we maybe don't need like more institutions, but just to get them to all talk to each other was going to be my answer.
So I guess partly that question might come from a conversation Dave and I have about secondary co-ops. And in the 1970s and the early 1980s, the UK government was funding secondary housing co-ops. And these were co-ops of people who knew how to set up housing co-ops. They weren't necessarily themselves even living in housing co-ops, although many of them were. So what that did was superpower the spread of housing co-ops, because having tried to set one up myself in the mid 90s in Manchester, there was an awful lot of brand new learning that even, we were people at university who, were not terrified of documents or anything, but still we were, kids and naive and never done big stuff about money before. So it was all very intimidating. And the reason that we had to do that was because Margaret Thatcher deleted the funding for housing co-ops, or the Thatcher government deleted the funding for secondary co-ops. And the spread of housing co-ops since the mid-90s, since the 90s, basically has slowed to a crawl. They're extraordinarily hard to get off the ground now, and they get no public money. This is what I mean by secondary organizations, is people that have gained a significant amount of experience in what it takes to instantiate a new commons. If there's no secondary organization, they stay in the commons, in that commons, and then either they transition to become a steward of it, or they're the sort of person who gets bored by management and they have to be ousted and get some people in who are actually competent. We've seen versions of it. And it's exactly why we set up the Festival of Commoning, because we see people commoning all over the place, whether they call themselves commons or not doesn't matter. And they've got almost no time to step outside the immense effort it takes to maintain and develop a commons in that context, whatever they're in. And so the wisdom, the learning, the know-how is siloed, and very often also people burn out from, we've seen in Brixton, the people burn out of community organizations all the time, and then they don't want to share their knowledge. They want to hide away. They don't, they're just, I'm done with that. And this is, so having somewhere people can go where they can not have to be the point anymore, where they can still earn a living by sharing their expertise and knowledge, seems to me an important thing for spread. That's my thinking. Because if we don't change the world reasonably quickly, all of our efforts may well turn out to have been interesting and kept us happy while they were going, but not fundamentally meaningful in the long run.
What might the next steps be for this particular group? Sort of MCS, Stroud Commons, Textile Commons, gang. What might next steps be?
It feels like a conversation to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Zoe and then Rosie.
Yeah, I mean, I'm interested in a lot of the things we've talked about and would like to learn more about a lot of them, particularly from Dill's work. So yeah, I would be up for sharing any resources or yeah, maybe having another conversation, non-recorded conversation.
Yeah,
just
they're different, aren't they?
chats to see, yeah, or what would be most useful for us to learn, really. Because yeah, it's that knowledge sharing, isn't it? It's that knowledge sharing piece, which takes time and is hard.
Yeah, I guess like the next, do you mean next steps as in like what are we planning to do next, or specifically about how to set up like a commons, like a textiles commons?
I just sort of what might we do, this group?
Yeah, I guess like, yeah, sharing knowledge, and I think it was interesting what you were saying about having the like secondary housing co-op organizations, because we've been I've been trying to help people set up like a farm co-op and trying to get advice for that. It's been really difficult. I guess for Textiles Commons, I feel like it's too early to have the second thing, but maybe if we successfully set up, then we'd think about setting up a second, like a sharing ability.
Okay, so I think this conversation has been really interesting, and I will share some resources, and we will talk again, no doubt. And there's lots of interesting things happening in the textile world by the look of it. But shall we leave it there, and we'll talk again soon?
Yes, please.
All right.
Great.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks,
everyone.
Dave.
Cheers.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Dave.
Thanks a
Bye.
lot. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
If you like our channel, please consider liking this video and subscribing. The more people like our videos and subscribe to our channel, the more the YouTube algorithm will share them. It doesn't cost anything, so please press the like and subscribe buttons. And if you click the bell icon just underneath as well, you'll get a notification when we upload a new video. Thank you.